Uh, Hi folks, you're with Tassus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this chat, I'd like to talk about how immigrant assimilation can be brought about, if assuming that's even the intention of the globalists, and I doubt it is actually, but assuming at some point it will be. How could it be achieved? Currently, with the mass migration, we've got a massive balkanization of all Western countries. Certainly in Australia, there are entire stretches of suburbs, one after the other, that is almost entirely Indian, for example. You won't see anyone other than Indian at the shops and driving around in the front yards and all that stuff. It's completely gone to, and same as, say, in entire suburbs that are Vietnamese, or entire suburbs that are some other nationality that have come to Australia recently, Thai or Chinese or whatever. And now they tend to cluster together, and whatever policies the governments of the West have pursued, that's one monumental failure, allowing these ghettos to appear. Now, if you go to these suburbs, for example, Chinese only is spoken on the street. The shop signs are all in Chinese, and a lot of the people there don't even speak a word of English. So it's in spite of the fact that the government's alleging that only competent English speakers in a point system can come to Australia. That's clearly nonsense. The amount of people coming that don't speak a word of English, or don't even 10 or 20 years, 30 years after arriving, is a testament to how much these enclaves and ghettos, racial ghettos, are forming and are allowed to form. Now, it's a different matter, I guess, with the next generation, where children that are born in the West, in this case born in Australia, they go through the entire education system. They've got the kindergarten, the primary school, the high school, senior high school. If they're brown or black, they're given a free pass to college, and so no matter if they're useless students or not, they're getting through to university. So they're having somewhere in the region of 16 years, 17 years of education in the Western education system, where they have to speak English and that sort of thing. So you'd think they would be pretty good to integrate, but that's not so. You go, and I've done another video on this. I've been to some of the most mixed race shopping centres in the country, where the white population is 10% or less, and there are all sorts of Chinese, Indians, Bangladeshis, Arabs of all sorts and all flavours. You get the whole thing there: Filipinos, Thais, the lot, Indonesians, and they're all there. And yet they hang around in their racial groups. Even kids being born in Australia, they still only date other Chinese, or Indians date other Indians, and so on. You get a crossover. The Chinese might be a little bit adventurous on dating white guys, and it seems to be a bit of a thing amongst Asian girls, as they even now phrase it when they're living in Australia. I want to fuck a Western guy. It seems to be a phrase you sort of hear around. But when it comes to marriage and dealing with family pressures and customs and habits, they only marry other Chinese. That's just how all the Indians marry other Indians, and so on. There's maybe 1.5% to 2% crossover to another racial group in terms of intermarriage and thus the procreation possibilities, but it's very small. And you see it even in say Chinese now, where they're the second generation that are born in Australia, and they still hang around only in their racial groups. And you see it in say the trains and the public transport after school, or you drive past, say, a bus interchange or a train station where the kids are on the train platform, and you'll see the Chinese group here, the Indian group there, the Arab group there, and the white group over there, and so on. They still don't intermix. So how will this be addressed? What can be done? Firstly, is it desirable to have assimilation? Now, we can have assimilation on two levels. one, of course, is racial assimilation through intermarriage on a grand scale, and that may happen over, say, hundreds of years, but it's certainly nowhere near happening at the moment. And this is even from immigrants that came to Australia, say from Vietnam, for example, in the mid 1970s. They still only hang around with other Vietnamese, still only marry other Vietnamese people. There is a bit of crossover there, but gee, it's not much. And again, now they're on the third generation born in Australia, and they're still not integrating. As I've often said, in Indians that came to the West in the 1850s, so 170 years ago, 160, 170 years ago, they're still sending back to the village of their ancestors for husbands and brides. They still only marry other Indians and so on, while claiming everyone else is being racist to them, of course. So the assimilation thing, is it desirable? And if so, how can it be done? So there's one way is through sort of procreation, through intermarriage. That's clearly going nowhere. As much as the government tries to push it, they're going at it from the wrong end. Anything wrong, anything that isn't working, anything dysfunction at all, anything where their policies fail, it's Whitey's fault. Whitey did it. Whitey did it. That's it. End of discussion. White supremacy and patriarchy, and they're not even looking at the issue of saying, well, how can we reasonably make this happen? Because the Indians and the Chinese and many others, they don't want to integrate or assimilate. So why is it, Whitey's fault? I mean, it isn't. And so how else could it be done? Well, the education system is one, but that's clearly not really working. Maybe a small percentage, but very small. This is again from kids who are now the second generation born in Australia, only educated in English-speaking Western schools and institutions, and they still don't really integrate, or quite rarely. In some cases, the cultural groups have effectively asked for their own publicly funded, taxpayer-funded high school. And there are some high schools where there's, for example, pretty much only Indians go there. Now, I don't know how desirable that is or helpful it is, because they're recreating their caste structure that they had in India. It's being now recreated in Australia. And where's that going to lead? That's hardly going to lead to intermarriage or integration or assimilation. So there's other ways to do it. Now, I don't know whether any of these ideas are good or bad or otherwise. So I'm just throwing it out there off the top of my head that if you want to migrate to Australia as a single person, or the West, for example, then you have to agree to marry someone out of your racial group. That could be one way of doing it, so that when you arrive that that's a requirement. I don't think that is a good idea personally, but for example, that's something that would be considered. Another way is through the taxation system. If you marry and procreate somebody from your own racial group, then you have to pay a higher rate of tax, or you're not eligible for childcare or something like that could be a way of doing it. There could be other ways, like especially this would affect the Indians or anyone from the wider subcontinent or the Middle East, or the Islamic nations, where you can't send back to the village of your ancestors for a bride or a husband. That's just totally out. Or you pay some massive bond or some punitive rate, something like that, and then that would force people to only marry. They maybe could marry another Indian or Arab or whatever, but they have to be locally born to do that. And then you'll find the following generation probably would integrate or would have a much better chance of it, or the integration would take place at a much faster rate. But this would particularly affect groups like, for example, the Indians, where, as I say, they're still sending back to the village of their ancestors, and even marrying a locally born Indian, that is. Even the families often put the Indians under a lot of pressure, the children under a lot of pressure to only get a bride or a husband from the village, again, the village of their ancestors. And I was at a dinner a while ago talking to an Indian there who's got a couple of young children, and she born in Australia, and she was pointing out how even though she came to Australia when she's 1 year old, she ended up getting a husband from the old country, and she was going to make sure her children did so as well. And they've got this real focus on keeping their genetic purity, which they believe is part of their overall moral and cultural and superiority to white people. So that's another thing there. But but if we're going to create assimilation and integration, then there needs to be ideas on the table. Maybe some will be controversial in order to achieve that. And I don't see any debate or discussion along those lines, but it's not happening organically or naturally. And indeed, the people that come here are encouraged to keep their culture separate from the mainstream here. And Indians in particular, their websites and activist newspapers openly gloat that they're going to be in the majority in Australia before too much longer, so they'll be deciding how it's all going to work, which is kind of a bit scary. Some of the stuff you see on those posts, but anyway, how is for example multiculturalism working? This diversity is our strength is probably one of the greatest, most evil, wicked lies that has ever been told, but we're hearing it all the time from idiots like Sadiq Khan in London and so on. And it's really not going to achieve. I don't see it's going to achieve anything. Having this balkanized nation where you've got all these tribal groups trying to vie for taxpayer benefit, while our own white politicians tell us that all white people are bad and even our own culture's being erased. I don't see Indian culture being erased or Chinese culture being erased or Arabic culture being erased. Far from it. It's only white culture's being erased. So how assimilation occurs going forward is probably going to be eradication of whites rather than interbreeding or interracial marriages by others. So this is something that it's a volcano that's going to explode big time at some point. And if it isn't addressed now through as much as can be arranged organic means, then it's going to be rather ugly and unpleasant down the track. And one imagines civil war is going to be not civil war as in the same people of the same tribe, but civil war between tribes in a balkanized area, which we can, like Serbia and Croatia and all that sort of stuff. And just to give you an idea of once that balkanization takes place, just how long it lasts. We think that the dramas in Serbia and Croatia and Kosovo, all this sort of stuff, that's all modern and recent. Do you know the Roman emperors, that's 2,000 years ago, the Roman emperors used to despair over what was the constant tribal warfare and just general mayhem and massacres that used to go on in Kosovo, what today we call Kosovo and Serbia and so on. Exactly the same. 2,000 years ago. Nothing's changed there. They've had that much drama for 2,000 years. And it's the same people, tribes and villages all trying to nuke each other. So what in the West I think we've done is just imported that sort of strife into the West without any means or any idea or any plan or anything at all to address it going forward. And as I say, I imagine it's going to involve some sort of tribal civil war in the future if no integration takes place. And I don't see it happening organically, particularly not when all the brown and black peoples being brought to the West are constantly being told that white people are evil and white culture's bad and white history's bad. Then why should they integrate with the whites? I mean, gee whiz. And so they're not going to integrate with any others. If they were going to integrate with anybody, it would have been with the whites. But our own white leaders are sold out to the globalists, do nothing but tell us that white people are bad and wicked and evil and so on, where everyone else is good. So that integration, it somehow needs to take place. And even if whites are gone, you've still got the other tribes, they're going to be bickering and fighting for who gets the biggest piece of the action. And so it needs to be, I believe it needs to be addressed as soon as that proper debate can take place, given the craven weakness of Western political leaders and the fact they can't utter a word without globalist approval means that debate maybe won't take place for quite some time. But I think it needs to be. But leave your comments in below and tell me what you think. You've been with Tassless today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.